The 2018 massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people is considered to be the deadliest attack on Jews in U.S. history. A federal jury convicted the gunman of 63 charges, including 11 counts of hate crimes. And as John Yang reports, the same jury is now deciding whether to recommend the death penalty.
Jeff, this phase of the trial is really what the case has been all about. Defense lawyers readily acknowledged during the guilt phase that the gunman planned and carried out the attack. The jury is now in the third day of hearing from the victims' families and friends. Later, the defense will make its case for a sentence of life in prison. This phase of the trial is expected to take at least a week. David Harris is a law professor at the University of Pittsburgh Law School. He's also an advisor to the 1027 Healing Partnership, which is a consortium helping the victims, survivors, and broader community deal with the shooting and its aftermath. To get to this phase, Mr. Harris, they had to go through a phase where they determined that the shooter was eligible for the death penalty. Now they're deciding whether or not to recommend the death penalty. Does the law give them say anything about what factors they ought to be considering in making this decision?
Yes, it does, John, and it's very, very clear about this. At this phase, the penalty phase, the jury is to consider evidence of aggravating factors and mitigating factors. Aggravating factors are things that would push the jury toward a sentence of death, and they can be things like a killing that is particularly heinous, victims who are particularly vulnerable, multiple victims. All of this is spelled out in the law, the statutes that cover the death penalty, and also by court decisions. This is balanced then against mitigating factors coming from the defense. And the defense mitigating factors could be things like brain trauma, mental illness, adverse childhood events. All of that will be weighed and balanced by the jury. And from that weighing and balancing, they will make the determination of whether this defendant is sentenced to death or life without parole.
And what the prosecution is doing now, putting up essentially victim impact statements. We've heard widows talk about losing their husbands, grandchildren talk about losing their grandmother. Even the girlfriend of one of the police officers who was wounded, talking about what that wound has done to his life. Is this all in trying to convince the jury that it is worth the death penalty?
Yes, that's what it is. This is the prosecution's aggravating evidence, and nothing is typically more powerful than testimony from people who were victimized themselves or whose loved ones were the subject of the murder. And that's what we have here. The Supreme Court allows this kind of victim impact evidence at this stage to show the jury a kind of slice of life. What has it meant that this victim has been lost? What has it meant to the families, to the workplace, to the community at large? And the court says that the jury can weigh this as part of the aggravating factors. It is typically very, very impactful.
And based on what we've heard in the guilt phase of this trial, and also in the phase to determine whether he's eligible, what do we expect the defense, what mitigating factors do we expect the defense to present?
The defense has treated the entire case front to back as a preview so far of its mitigating evidence. So we know pretty much what they're going to bring. What we'll hear about is the fact that they say that the defendant has a series of mental illnesses, that perhaps he has schizophrenia, that he has epilepsy, another mental disease, that he had some very terrible things happen during his childhood. As they said in their opening argument for this phase of the trial, don't add more death to this. Punishment, yes. Death, no.
And on that point, I know that you live in relatively close to the synagogue where this shooting took place, which is a very tight-knit community, still very much a Jewish enclave. And I know that there is an array of opinions about whether this man should get life or get the death penalty. What do you hear from your neighbors? What do you hear from your fellow congregants to sort of illustrate this?
Well, this is the most common question I get asked as a person who taught classes to help the community come to grips with the trial. And we're a mixed a group of opinions, just like Americans are on the death penalty. There are many people who say, if this isn't a death penalty case, I don't know what it is. If anybody ever deserved the death penalty, this guy does. Others are just as opposed to the death penalty under any circumstances, even these. So there is not a unanimity of opinion on this. What we are is united in our determination to support the victims, to see the process through correctly, to see the best we can as human beings that justice is done. You know, we don't always get what we want out of the legal process, but what we will get here is we will know that this case was carried out consistent with our values as a community, whether our values as a Jewish community, or an American community, the community of Pittsburgh. That's what we have going for us. But what we're seeing here is a city and a community coming to grips with the worst thing that can happen in a very solid way that seeks justice.
David Harris from the University of Pittsburgh Law School, thank you very much.
My pleasure.